Thank you very much for having me. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be able to talk to you today. My name is Timm Teubner. I'm Professor of Trust and Digital Services at Technical University of Berlin. And my research group is mainly concerned with trust and reputation systems in the domain of digital markets, online platforms. And while we're not primarily concerned with online education or education and credentials in general, as you've just heard, I think there's a lot of parallels you will discover between trust in online platforms and digital markets and education systems. So today I want to take you on a journey through the domain of online platforms and reputation systems, starting off with why you should or should not have trust in platforms on the internet, and spoiler alert, maybe you shouldn't. Then talk briefly about reputation systems, focusing on fake reviews, review inflation, and portability. Going on towards looking at how other features such as profile images and face imagery can create trust. And finally, I want to close with a brief outlook on some current research we're doing on trust in artificial intelligence. So I guess you're all familiar with the scenario, browsing for a flight or for a hotel online, and then you're being bombarded with all these features and alerts that prompt you to book because so and so many people are looking at this offer right now, it's running out of stock, it's high in demand, only a few hotel rooms or whatever left. And this, of course, is intended to create some sort of urgency or scarcity perception on your side in order to prompt you to book, right? To pressure you somehow. The question is, should you actually trust these cues? And well, in a way, these cues have to be true to some extent, but it's been found that, of course, what platforms and hotels do is divide their rooms and their offers into categories of size 1, where no matter the category, there's only 1 or 2 hotel rooms or items left, so that these cues can actually be true to some extent, but in fact they aren't. And also there's outright scams, as this colleague has discovered on a flight platform where 38 people were supposed to be looking at this current flight. And going into the HTML source code, of course, you can discover what is behind that, and what she found is that behind all of that was a simple math random function that created this allegedly demand of people looking for that. So that's certainly something to keep in mind, that you're actually being tricked into these things. In order to talk about trust, we should first use some sort of working definition for trust. And what is quite common in the realm of information systems is this Meyer and colleagues definition from the 90s, where we define trust as the willingness of a party to be vulnerable to the actions of another party. And what we usually assume is that the other party will be a willing being with intent. So trust in this way is the willingness to accept strategic uncertainty, where you actually have skin in the game. So there's something to lose for you. And looking at the specifics of trust, usually we would differentiate different dimensions, targets, and also types of trust. Where you see trusting someone, yes, but with regard to what, right? Is it their ability, or is it benevolence, or is it integrity, for instance, right? If you book say a ride on a ride-sharing platform, or book an Airbnb apartment, you have to trust your host in a way to be integral, to be benevolent, to not be a fraud, right? But also to be able to provide the service in a way that is working out for you, right? Even the nicest guy can be a good driver. If this person cannot drive a car properly, you may put your life in danger, right? Then it's the question, who are you trusting, right? Is it the peer, the service provider on the platform, or is it the platform itself? And it turns out that there's a lot of interaction going on, that one inherits trust from the other. So creating a trusted platform will also benefit everyone acting on that platform in that sense. And then it comes to how to measure it actually. From a research perspective, it's always relevant, of course, to how do we actually measure that, right? How do we conduct research and study trust? And what can be differentiated here is, in a broad sense, trusting beliefs that are usually survey-based, and people answer questions on a survey, on survey scales. And of course, this can be very detailed and ask for the specifics of the above aspects, but of course it's only answers to questions on paper, and this gives rise to the questions whether this is actually reliable. And another thing to look at, of course, in this sense is trusting behavior, right? And economists would always go for behavior, since this is the stronger indicator of actual trust. The problem, of course, on the other hand, with behavior is that there's so many factors that play into behavior as well. It's not necessarily only trust, right? So it's a complicated thing. Considering and that trust is necessary on the internet, of course, just using the example of Airbnb, imagine you book this apartment or book an apartment, show up on site, and then the host is not there, or the apartment doesn't exist, and you're stranded out there in the wilderness. So you have to actually have some degree of trust in order for these transactions to happen. And in that sense, of course, platforms are very keen on providing the technology, the features, and the mechanisms to create trust between the parties. And what we did a while back was a field experiment, a so-called audit study, where we created disguised profiles on Airbnb and contacted hosts. And what we varied here systematically was whether we equipped these profiles with profile pictures or also self-descriptions of the host of the potential guests. What we see is that the acceptance rate, so the probability that your request will actually be accepted by the host, increases significantly when you provide some information about yourself, including these images and also including some contextual information about what's your background, what's the intent of your travel. What's interesting is actually that this already creates some sort of this trust and discrimination trade-off, right? Where providing a profile image of yourself on the internet, of course, provides some information, decreases this information asymmetry, but on the other hand, of course, provides anchors for discrimination. And this has been a while back, and Airbnb since then has changed the system as they were facing a public shitstorm, I would even call it, of racial discrimination on the platform, and they removed the profile images from the application process. Just like in any professional, or in most of the professional application processes, where a CV wouldn't actually include an image, right? And Airbnb was actually forced to do that. At least they thought of so. So we see that there's already tension between creating trust and also creating some harmful effects potentially in terms of discrimination. And then it's not only about how much trust is actually created through means such as reputation systems or images, but also how much trust is actually required, right? And we can put this schematically here in this two-dimensional diagram, where on the one hand we see that, well, different applications require different amounts of trust. Ordering a t-shirt or something else, a low-cost item on eBay, will certainly not be as sensitive in that sense as booking an apartment on Airbnb, or even more so booking a babysitter for your children on a platform like Charlie Cares, or even using this portal Wingly, which is basically a ride-sharing platform for private airplanes. So you literally will put your life into the hands of the pilot who's flying you there. So the required trust will actually be higher. And then we see that some of the transactions here, given the specific combinations, will actually take place. Some of them won't, right? And in order to increase your volume, the revenue of your platform, you can think of two ways, right? You can, given the required trust of your platform, try to increase the amount of existing trust by, say, using and employing reputation systems and images, etc. But you can also think of reducing the required amount of trust that is actually necessary, right? By, for instance, providing warranties and insurances. And some of the ride-sharing platforms actually did that, providing some guarantees that once a driver didn't show up, you would have a backup option of booking a Deutsche Bahn ticket instead, and the platform would cover that. So there are different mechanisms or different dimensions in which you should think of trust in that regard. Looking at online trust and reputation system, what we see across the board, basically across all popular and commonly used platforms, is that they all employ a broad set of mechanisms, including profile images, badges, verifications, reputation systems, self-descriptions, text reviews by other guests or other customers. And this is true not only for Airbnb and eBay, but basically across the board. Looking at platforms as Wingly, crowdwork platforms, taxi, mobility services, peer-to-peer, car sharing, etc. So this is not a unique feature to any of those platforms, but they are learning from each other and they are copying each other in a way. So we see this common standard emerging in this online world. And one centerpiece, of course, is our reputation systems, usually on a numerical 5 or 10 star scale. And these numerical systems can be thought of also as having two dimensions, right? One is the valence dimension or the quality dimensions, indicating how good a service was on this very easy, of course, scale from 1 to 5 stars. And this is one aspect, and the other one, of course, is volume, right? Looking at the information of how many people actually booked the service before, and this speaks to how much experience, for instance, this provider has on the platform, but also, of course, in some way on how reliable the quality score actually is in it by itself. And what we see here is, of course, a very interesting relation that, of course, rating valence, so how good the rating is, has a positive effect on, in this case here, how often items are actually purchased or put into the basket on a big e-commerce platform. With a peculiar exception here, as you can see that the straight 5.0 star ratings seem to be a little bit of an outlier here, where maybe there is something as too good to be true, right? Where some ratings may not even work as expected. And also we see that valence or volume in this sense here has a positive effect. More volume will increase the conversion rate, so how often an item is actually checked out in that sense, which is the behavioral indicator for trust in this sense. And we see also, I mean, it gets more complex than that, of course. We see that there's a unique interaction where, given the volume on the x-axis here, more volume is usually associated with higher conversion rates, so more trust given higher volume, and also better scores are usually associated with higher conversion rates, with one peculiar exception, and this was already indicated here. A straight 5-star rating doesn't really work for a high volume, where there seems to be some sort of interaction affecting the credibility of the whole rating itself, right? It's just very unlikely that a buyer or a seller or a product acquires so many ratings and still manages to stick to the best possible outcome, right? Just from a statistical perspective, you would expect some lower scores. So these outliers, or these exceptions, are somehow also reflected in the fact that there will be lower trust and some sort of distrust on the customer side. Then, of course, we see that ratings and these features do have economic value. Items are being purchased more often. Drivers are being booked more often. Apartments are being booked more often, given better scores. And of course, when there is economic value in something, there will, of course, be some sort of misuse and fraud. And fake reviews are no exception here. And this is actually something I received a couple of months ago when I purchased something through Amazon, and what these sellers sent me are incentives to review their product with the promise to compensate me for my effort of rating the product. Of course, the 30 euros for my review or 10 euros for the other review was contingent on the fact that I would give them a 5-star rating. So they try to buy my 5-star evaluation of their product, right? So this you may not even call a fake review. This somehow is maybe incentivized review, but of course there is outright scam and outright fake review portals. And there's even a secondary market emerging for reviews like that, where you can buy, for instance, Twitter followers or App Store reviews that are being sold on these platforms. And we don't even have to go that far. There is one company, 5-Star Marketing. I think they are even located in Berlin at Breitscheidplatz, but I think it's registered in Belize. So in order to avoid, of course, German legislation, or execution more. And you can buy ratings for various platforms here, including Amazon. And as you can see, the economic value they apparently put on these ratings is almost 23 euros per rating, right? So on the other side, this speaks to the fact that these ratings must have some economic value, right? And hence it's not all too surprising that there will be the secondary market for ratings. Of course, then there is the counter movement, and other services and providers try to give you a more sincere insight into, for instance, in this case, Amazon products and reviews, where you simply paste the product link into this platform here, and Review Meta promises to evaluate, to de-bias the rating for you and somehow filter out, based on AI and other evaluation techniques, to filter out the board or the fake reviews and provide a more honest score for you. It's a little bit debatable whether this is actually working properly, but at least you can see there is movement into this direction. And of course, there's also review inflation. No? It's not only a topic that is relevant in the supermarket right now, but also in online portals and platforms. And maybe there's also a link to education systems, right, where we see like a long-lasting but steady trend of grade inflation, right, where in many domains grades tend to get better and better. We see that in online reviews as well. This study followed a big online labor market, mainly for programming and graphic design tasks, over a couple of years. And as you can see, the review scores steadily increased. And I mean, we have the general problem that most of the reputation systems are somewhat biased, where the most positive reviews are most common. But we also see that this trend is even getting worse over time. And this is not due to the fact that quality is simply increasing, and this is then reflected in better reviews. But we see when anchoring this to specific words that occur in the text reviews associated with these reviews. For instance, the worker did a good job or was great to work with. We see that even given this textual evaluation, we see that between 2008 and 2015, the average rating score that was associated with this text also increased. And this is not only true for the positive evaluations, but also for the negative ones, right? Where these increased from like 1 to 2 stars over that area. So there is some sort of adaptation of what is considered an appropriate or a good review, and this is increasing over time. So there's actually true inflation in this market as well. And this, of course, puts a question mark on the functionality of these systems, and platforms have to think about ways of how to deal with that. And then another topic that has been around since, I would say, the emergence of the large-scale online platform economy is data portability and specifically reputation portability. And the main idea here is that most of the platform, as it stands, work as silos or as islands, where when you're active on one platform, you will, when you start to get active on another platform, not really benefit from that. You're not able to port your reputation you earned on one platform to the other, right? Look at this seller on eBay who now wants to start to host on Airbnb, or even wants just to book an apartment as a guest, for which you also need some sort of reputation. And the question is, can she actually import her good track record, her good ratings to the platform? And if so, what does this change? Is there something lost maybe in translation, right? And what happens actually if you think about cases where there's competing platforms, right? Do they have any incentive to cooperate here? So this is the outset. And this is actually not a new topic. The EU has been talking about reputation portability for quite a while, and they are demanding research, and then they are demanding initiatives into that direction, because of course the underlying thought here is in that sense that consumer protection could be improved, since platforms, of course, create lock-in, right? And when you earn your reputation on one platform, you gradually are locked into that platform, as you cannot change to another platform or have a hard time, right? And this decreases competition between platforms and just makes antitrust problems worse between these platforms. So there is a consumer protection initiative behind this idea. And even since 2010, so over the last 10 years, there have been a bunch of services that have tried to serve as brokers of online reputation, right? As third-party brokers on which you can register and aggregate the reputation scores you earned on different platforms. And there have been many initiatives trying to do that, but none of them actually worked. All of these are out of business or have moved their operations to other directions. But there is one exception, and this is the direct import of reputation. So there are actually some examples of e-commerce platforms in the US, very similar to eBay, that allow their sellers to import their Amazon and eBay ratings to this platform. And of course, kickstarting their operation on these new platforms. And this direct import is a very interesting direction that we're looking into right now. There is some backing in a way, where the EU, of course, with the General Data Protection Regulation, Article 20, where there is a right to data portability, right? However, it's not really clear right now whether this also pertains to reputational data, because one specific feature here is that the data you're actually supposed to be able to port is provided by yourself, right? And the very nature of reputational data is that you don't write it yourself, but it is provided for you. Someone provides this rating for you, someone rates you, right? So this wouldn't directly fall under this Article 20 here, but the idea behind the article would actually include reputational data, of course, because in a way it is personal data and it very much pertains to your profile and online identity. So what we did here is actually study in a large-scale experiment how different constellations of on-site and imported ratings would interfere with each other. And this is quite an intricate topic, because it's not clear whether importing a rating would in some cases even hurt you, right? Consider you're moving to a new platform, don't have any ratings there, and then you decide, okay, I have some ratings on another platform and I decide to import them. And say this is a mediocre rating only. It may be better than nothing, but as soon as you start collecting reputation on the new platform, this may be actually dragging you down. Right? So it will very much depend on the constellation, the combination of scores that determine your trustworthiness on the platform. And we decided, I'll just go over the technical details a little bit faster. We decided differentiated four conceptual cases here, where there's either no ratings whatsoever, neither imported ones nor on-site, just on-site rating but no imported ones, just imported but no on-site ratings, or both, right? Which then also can interact. This gives rise to this statistical formulation where the trustworthiness would emerge as the combination of these scores, and this now allows us to run an experiment simply and collect data on that and try to estimate the parameters of this function. Technically, this looks like that, but I want to skip that part for now. So we designed an experiment around this whole idea. Invited subjects online from an online platform to take part and to evaluate these profiles. Profiles looked like that, very much blending out all the irrelevant information here, but focusing specifically on the two or one rating score that is visible, and then looking into how these actually translate into trustworthiness on the platform. This is the treatment structure with a total of 500 subjects. And what we see is that given that there's no score available at all, we see a very simple result. There is some sort of trustworthiness as a baseline, right? And this is a dimensional number here. It's really only meaningful in relation to the other scores, but visually this would look like this, right? No rating present, we have a score on this 0 to 1 scale of somewhere in the middle. And it gets interesting now when we consider the other cases in comparison, right? When you have an imported rating. And the statistical result is that there's a positive impact of this rating's value. Higher scores are associated with higher trust. This is not surprising. The question is, how specifically does that look, right? And we see that this emerges here as a result, and importing a rating apparently only makes sense once it overcomes a certain threshold. And we can now determine this threshold, which is for the outline scenario somewhere in the middle of the range in three stars. And then we can do the same for on-site, for an on-site rating, where we see a very similar slope, a very similar intersection point, meaning that it would be even better to reset your account to 0 ratings when you earn a bad rating in the beginning, right? And the fun part comes now when we look at the intersection of both ratings, or the interaction effects, and we see that there is this sort of span of different functions with different intersection points, and looking at that gives you a strategic interplay, a strategic map, basically, where given the rating score you have on the platform itself and the reputation score you may be able to import from another platform on these two axes, you can decide in the different combinations where it's worthwhile importing that score and where it isn't. Right? And as you can see, this is not a very simple task, but it really depends on the specific scores in that sense. All right, enough of that. You can see that the interplay of these numerical scores is quite complex, and it really will depend on the perception. And this is not something that is easily foreseen, but has to be somehow analyzed in a more structured way. Beyond numerical ratings and these scores, of course, there's other stuff, other things you can do, of course, and platforms also leverage other mechanisms, and one of them are faces and avatars. All right, thinking of booking an Airbnb and thinking you may be concerned that your host will strangle you while you sleep, right? But looking at that profile, Joel, I think he's even from Berlin, you may have a positive feeling that this guy may actually not strangle you while you sleep in his apartment, right? So, and I think this just speaks to the power of faces, right? And this the human perception of positive emotions that are conveyed by faces. And this is not a new discovery, of course. Even back in the early 2010, 2012 years, 10 years ago, ride-sharing portals such as Mit Fahrgelegenheit already knew that and prompted their users to upload a picture, because this actually creates trust. They knew that already. BlaBlaCar, another ride-sharing platform, even offers like a filter in their search where you can only find rides that actually have a driver with a profile photo, right, in order to be able to see what you're going to get somehow. Now, I guess looking at the profiles here, it's a little bit debatable if every of the drivers will actually benefit from their photo, but well, the idea behind that, I guess, is clear. Right? And you can even see that, of course, faces always attract attention, right? We are magically attracted by faces. You can see this in eye tracking results, that faces will always be relevant for our perception, and thus also for our thought process and the determination of trust. And this is particularly interesting in comparison to like these trust seals, right, that also platforms try to use that don't receive that much attention as well. And I mean, this is quite natural. We are hardwired in a way to react to faces and to be able to interpret faces. And when you look at these very, very like pixelated images, I'm pretty sure you're all able to see faces and even determine the specific person behind that, at least in the left and central case. But I'm pretty sure if you pinch your eyes a little bit, you can even see a face very, very clear in the right picture, right? So this really, in my opinion, demonstrates that we're hardwired to detect faces and to interpret faces. And there's actually some brain research on that found that there's a specific area that is specifically hardwired to interpret and detect faces in the brain, the so-called fusiform face area. It's specifically involved in detecting faces. I mean, it's quite clear from an evolutionary perspective that it must have been a very important feature to be able to tell apart our friends and foes in the tribe, and also interpret emotions and intent. So this is a very rudimentary function, right? And the interesting part is that this also applies for comic faces and even for animal faces, right? Everything that basically looks like a face is interpreted as such, and it doesn't apply for other body parts or the back of a head, right? It's really discriminatory in that sense. And it's a fast process, it's involuntary, and it's also present in infants immediately after birth. So it's nothing that we're socially learning or culturally inheriting, it's hardwired in that sense. And it's also present in primates, and even primates have this reaction when they look at cartoon faces. And looking at platforms like Airbnb, we see, of course, that intuitively most of the users make use of that. And like 2/3 of them actually upload profile images that have a clear face visible, or even two when it's a couple in many cases. And only minorities use other types of pictures. Some of them actually use avatars. And avatars are, in that sense, an interesting alternative as of course, photos represent biometric markers, right? And you will always be identifiable based on a profile picture. And in front of the background of privacy issues, you may actually want to think about using avatars in some applications. Photos, of course, very similar to the ratings, are also being used for fraudulent purposes, where on LinkedIn it was discovered that many of these approaches that are being made to people are using AI-generated profile images, so clearly indicating that there's some fake account behind that. And this is just, maybe, I guess most of you will know that, but these AI-generated images by now are on a level that are usually indistinguishable from actually photorealistic, or actually photos, because they are so accurate and cannot really be distinguished in that sense. But of course, they try to leverage the positive emotions conveyed by photos as well. So be aware, especially if these photos stick to this very certain rule, and this is actually how it's been discovered, that these images are very, very much aligned with a very central pattern of where the eyes are, and they will always follow the same alignment. So this is something to keep in mind. And avatars as an alternative, we tried out the use of avatars in an interaction experiment of subjects in an economic lab experiment. And what we found, of course, we didn't invite the actors here, but when the students we had in this experiment were represented by avatars, the cooperation and trust level between them was as high as when using the real photographs. So, and significantly higher than when using no images at all. So these avatars may actually be an interesting alternative for many cases where you want to represent yourself somehow on the platform, convey some features, but don't want to provide biometric information in that sense. And last, I want to shed some brief light on trust in AI, which of course is by now a really widespread and relevant topic in many application areas. And you may know, as popular culture has it, people sometimes tend to overly trust AI or technology in general and follow advice driving into a lake. And this is actually not only true in popular culture, but we see these real examples where people end up in lakes or on cliffs, or drive to Croatia instead of a nearby town just because the GPS told them so. So I guess there is something to do here, and some evidence of overtrust in AI. And what we've been looking here in this study is how people trust in an AI when the AI tries to explain itself a little bit, right? And the task here was to label these little texts on a binary scale as positive or negative, right? These are movie reviews. This is a data set that is commonly being used in machine learning research. And their task was to label 50 of these texts as positive or negative, and they would receive money depending on how good they were at labeling, right? But the thing was that they had actually the advice of some AI system at their disposal. Well, so the AI predicted something here, in this case positive, and what we varied in the study was whether the AI also provided some word highlighting on which this decision or this prediction was based on, and also a confidence score, how confident it was or it felt with this outcome, right? And what we find is that both features, in the sense of explainable AI, will actually decrease how often people will trust the AI. And this is quite contrary to the public discourse right now, where there's always demanded that there should be transparency in order for people to trust in AI. We find quite the opposite here, that more transparency will actually hurt trusting behavior. And this is particularly interesting since not only trust in AI decreased with these measures, but also performance. So people actually under-trusted in that sense, right? And this gives rise to another really interesting intersection, which is this trust-performance trade-off, or maybe sometimes these features are also in line, where when you think of human AI teams, where one can use the input of the other, but the end result is usually done by a human, we see that the scale, most of the data points will actually hit the border on the right side here, where they actually have to lower trust a little bit here in order to achieve higher performance levels. So this is a very emerging topic right now, and there's a lot of research being done. So I think we will see a lot of trust in AI results and findings in the next coming years. Last, maybe closing the loop towards credential systems. Just a few weeks ago, I think this happened. I really couldn't believe my eyes when I read that a 20-year-old actually obtained a position as a doctoral, as a medical doctor in a clinic. And the question is, how can this actually work, right? How do you apply in a hospital, and how can you forge this information? Does the hospital administration actually trust documents that are being sent in on paper? And apparently this is the case. And I think you mentioned that paper documents are still a standard, but this really reminds me on this guy, right? Really, right? How is this possible in 2022, sending information that is so obviously in contrast to even her age in this case, right? Why do we trust paper documents, plain documents, where even everyone can now use Adobe editors and even edit any PDF document, right? And undistinguishable from the original document. We really should think of other means that will not only make these application processes more trustworthy, but also facilitate or simplify the whole verification process. Right? Consider the effort that is being needed, the work that is being needed to verify whether an application like that is actually true and not forged. So there, I think, is a need in that way for a paradigm shift. In that sense, thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to talking to you.